The idea that the Sphinx is older than dynastic Egypt is not original to John Anthony West, nor to Schwaller de Lubitsch before him. Rosicrucians, Theosophists, Gurdjieff, and many unorthodox scholars of Western esoteric tradition have long held this idea. But until John Anthony West, no one has thought to look to geology for proof. In previous videos that you may find on the Sphinx of Egypt playlist here on this channel show clearly the nature and extent of erosional damage to the Sphinx and its adjacent temples. The damage is visible to the naked eye of scholars and laymen alike, and it's something I point out in my intensive study tours of Egypt, tours that you can learn more about by visiting ADEPTexpeditions.com. Unfortunately, when it comes to getting close to pinpointing the true age of the Sphinx, we are at a standstill. Yes, the mystery of the Sphinx is on pause until further notice. Hence this appeal and our call to action for a team of qualified scientists willing to put the theory to the test. Nowhere in Egypt is there a statue or temple exhibiting weathering similar to the Sphinx and its temple complex. The only exception are the colossi of Memnon, but their weathering is easily accounted for. What's up everybody, Anyextee here, coming to you about 5 minutes away from my home here in Luxor, and I am now standing in front of the awe-inspiring Colossi of Memnon. These two huge sandstone statues have fallen victim to the rising groundwater level of the Nile. So water has risen and reacted by capillary action with the salts in the stone. And so the stone has crumbled away, almost destroying the outline of one of the statues. You can see here on this one how the outline is damaged. It's intact over here, but it's kind of missing the shoulder and the right arm. You can see the hand is still on the leg, but the arm is missing. But the same conditions do not apply to the Sphinx, and the outward effects are totally different. The severe damage here is attributed hugely to chemical reaction. The rising floodplain of the Nile has placed the huge colossi in the path of the annual Nile inundation. As you can see here in this rare vintage photo, shared with me from the private collection of Dr. El Said Hagazi, Chief Inspector for all of Luxor for over 20 years. Water rising by capillary action has reacted with the salts in the stone, destroying the surface. Unlike the Sphinx, the colossi have never been buried in the sand, so unfortunately they have caught the worst of the elements for 3,000 years. That's longer than the Sphinx, much longer. And even though severe, the damage to the colossi is not as severe as the damage to the Sphinx, hence the difference in appearance. For the reasons that I have just mentioned, John Anthony West believed that the surface damage to the Great Sphinx of Giza cannot be due to either action of wind and sand. The closer we look into Schwaller de Lubitsch's observation of water erosion on the Sphinx, the more conclusively it is substantiated. And this observation of the great esoteric author in turn inspired my mentor, the late great John Anthony West, ultimately resulting in geologist Dr. Robert Schoch performing experiments in and around the Sphinx Enclosure. But testing to see if the water erosion theory held up upon close inspection was only one of Dr. Robert Schoch's objectives. The second, which followed, was to see if other pieces of the theory fit together. But this would require a collaboration effort with geophysicist Dr. Thomas Dobeke. and his state-of-the-art seismographic equipment to map subsurface geology. The processed geological data yielded an unexpected result. Since the stone of the floor is the same all around, and sides and back have been subjected to identical weather conditions since dynastic times, Schoch and Dobecki took this to mean but one thing. The back area of the Sphinx must have been cut at a later date. Nothing else could account for the difference in gathering depths. This allowed for Schoch to put forth a tentative date for the Sphinx of 5000 to 7000 BC at minimum. But in spite of the overall strength of the evidence, there could be one Achilles heel. So today, I am taking you back to Egypt, inside the Sphinx Enclosure, to take a closer look at the evidence. With the evidence in front of you, you can be the judge. Let's go down into the Sphinx Enclosure for another ADEPT expedition.
I want to point this out because this is maybe one Achilles heel in Schoch Dobecki's experiment. He will probably say no, but I'm going to point it out because we are in full disclosure. So what Schoch and Dobecki proposed is that this channel was cut by Old Kingdom builders. Okay, so what I was saying is that in the assumption in the Dobecki-Schoch model is that this whole channel here was cut by the Old Kingdom builders, by Khafre's workers basically. And so this is the standard against which you compare the other two lines, right? So the decay on these two lines is much deeper than here because this is Old Kingdom. And so Schoch is saying, well, this is 4,500 years old, the decay I'm talking about, right? Well, then that decay is more than twice that old. And that's how it comes up with 10,000 BC. Okay, so this is his standard. That is his assumption, right? It's not a bad assumption. Lehner would easily agree because he would say that some of these, you see how some of these walls are kind of vertical down. This is where the builders were still cutting stones, and you can actually see an imprint of the stone block here, right? And they were trying to get a right angle into the ditch, and then at some point they just stopped, they abandoned, okay? And you can also see signs of stopping the work in the front. So that's probably when Khafre died, and they just, they walked off. You mentioned the Old Kingdom blocks used to repair. That was you, right? Okay, so if we were allowed to go up the tail through that shaft, right, you would see a beautiful example of the pre-existing decay that was repaired by Old Kingdom builders, because it's the big blocks, right? So what interesting, I just looked this up yesterday again. Lehner's thesis, he says, well, they couldn't have really been Old Kingdom blocks because the monument is already decayed. So, right, it's circuitous reasoning. But the monument is decayed. You can see the shelf, member one, right? Then member two, which is the weaker limestone, is pushed in. You can see this under, and then you see an Old Kingdom block covering it. And that's what makes that channel up there. So it's a beautiful example that the Old Kingdom builders already had to repair this monument. Why? Because it pre-existed.
Yeah, so it is older
Yeah.
than Old Kingdom.
Another thing I wanted to, because you mentioned this, that channel over there, that is what Egyptologists are saying proves to them that the Sphinx couldn't have existed before the causeway. Because they say that the water runoff, they wouldn't have allowed this water channel which runs on the causeway on this side. It's like a drain, basically. They wouldn't have allowed the water to flow into this area if there had been a Sphinx. It's not necessarily tight evidence, but I'm just more pointing it out. So this is one part of their reasoning that this had to come after the causeway. We don't agree with it, but I'm just pointing it out.
But Manu, why would the Old Kingdom have restoration with their own quality?
Absolutely.
If it is not eroded, it must have been much
You're
older.
preaching to the choir. Now the rationale of the Orthodox theory that this is an Old Kingdom design, right? So what they're saying is basically a two-part logic. They're saying that all these monuments are connected into a logical sequence, starting over there with the Pyramid Temple, Causeway, Sphinx, the two temples here, and so yes, you can connect all the monuments, but then how do you date it? Okay, and that evidence, they say, comes from this ridge right here. Okay, so you see these little depressions. That's where they found Old Kingdom debris. They found hammers, copper chisel, pot shards, right? And that is what they're using to date this whole complex. Okay, now compare that with the geological experiment I was talking about, Robert Schoch's experiment. You be the judge, okay? The Egyptologists are saying the main evidence for dating this complex comes from this ridge, the debris they found. And then there's another area right here under the corner of this temple. They found blocks that hadn't been incorporated into the unfinished corner here. And under that block, they found Old Kingdom debris. Okay, so they said again, this must have been an Old Kingdom design. Okay, so this is kind of that's the evidence. There's one more piece. They took one carbon-14 sample from that temple, and it dates to the Old Kingdom. It's like a little carbon, like a burned wood speck or something like that.
Now, Manu,
who's they? Schoch?
Lehner.
No,
the archaeologist, the Egyptologist, Mark Lehner.
Yeah, this is Mark Lehner's thesis, right? So he found this debris in these depressions up here. So this is basically the quarry ridge.
So
yeah.
What is the Old Kingdom debris?
You know, like red pottery, right? The hammer, the copper.
So because they didn't find something before Old Kingdom, so it's dated to Old Kingdom?
Yeah, I'm just here presenting the evidence.
Yeah.
You guys be the judge.
So there you have it. We have put the evidence before you. Let us know what you think the age of the Sphinx is. Do you agree with the standard, usual academic explanation for the Sphinx being part of the Old Kingdom 4th Dynasty, or do you see a much older date for the Sphinx? Let us know what you think and why in the comments down below. We put the evidence in front of you for how Egyptologists have put together the dating and the attributions, and we've explained quite a bit in this Sphinx series so far. If you haven't seen my other videos in this series, you can do so by checking out the Sphinx playlist here on this channel. I would recommend starting with this video right here, which is my documentary on the Sphinx Explained: Identity, Origins, and Hidden Entrances. It's over an hour long, but it's well worth it, packed with details. Familiarize yourself with that, and then just go through the whole playlist so you can get all of the concepts. And if you'd like to join me inside the Sphinx Enclosure, I am leading another ADEPT expedition. We will have special permission access inside the Sphinx Enclosure so we can go over all the details. I can show you the water erosion features and other aspects of the Sphinx. Unfortunately, my September 2022 tour with Johanna James is now sold out, but I am going to be announcing 2 more tours this year, one in June and one in October. These are going to be my signature Esoteric Egypt tours, but I will have a different co-host for each who will soon be announced. So stay tuned. I haven't put it up on the website yet, but you can learn more by going to adeptexpeditions.com, and there you can sign up for our email list so that you can receive updates and discounts on future tours, so you can get yourself a reduced rate. I'm here at my home in Luxor. You can see in the back, it's a little hazy out, but the mountain back there, you can actually see some of the tombs of the nobles. Again, if you'd like to come to Egypt, ADEPT Expeditions is the way to go. If you like what I'm doing and you want to kick some value back this way, you can help me out by supporting this channel and my work on Patreon. I appreciate all help at any level. I also offer some very cool benefits for Patreon supporters. So check out patreon.com/Anyextee. And if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. Please share it with your friends. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for future videos. This is Anyextee for ADEPT Expeditions on a very windy and somewhat chilly day here in Luxor, signing out. Peace out, everybody.